Welcome everyone to our Be Steward program lectures. We're really happy to have you here. My name is Emily Carlson. I am your host this evening. If you have any questions or issues, please feel free to message me in the chat and I will be happy to help you with them. Before I introduce our speaker today, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of the Be Stewards program in case this is your first time encountering us. So Be Stewards are part of the Oregon State University Extension Service programs, and we are building habitat for bees. So the Bee Stewards is a online, self-paced, interactive course designed for you to meet your goals. And what that looks like is we start with a overview of bee biology to understand what pollinators need, what bees need, and how we can meet those needs. We then have a habitat assessment portion where you go onto your own property or your community garden or whatever property it is you're working with to get an idea of what habitat you already have, what you want to improve. You then create a habitat plan, which allows you to prioritize and implement those projects. And then get help along the way as you go through that process. If you're interested in learning more, you can scan this QR code here or go to our website here at the bottom. Click. And part of what's really cool about this program and pretty unique is when you go through the Bee Stewards, you will perform an inventory of the blooming plants on your property. And that allows the scientists at Oregon State that you work with to basically create a list of plants that will fill your pollinator gaps. So basically letting people know, if you install this plant, then you'll get a ton more bee diversity on your site because you're supporting this guild of bees. And so that will be like a customized report for you, which is really valuable, I think. And so, here's some examples of the predicted bees that might be on your property based off of what flowers we know bees visit, and therefore, what flowers you have on your property. And then you would get a list of what you could do to enhance it even more, as well as telling you kind of where those types of plants might fit. And great, so that is the Bee Stewards. I'm going to stop sharing. We have a great presentation from Amanda today. Amanda has been working for the Deschutes Land Trust for over 20 years and is their Stewardship Director. So she oversees all of the management of the Land Trust protected lands. She leads butterfly tours on Land Trust preserves, participates in the annual North American Butterfly Association butterfly counts in Central Oregon, and is guiding the Land Trust work with regional monarch and pollinator conservation. In her free time, she likes to fly like a butterfly on aerial silks and spend time with her family exploring Oregon's great outdoors and scuba diving tropical waters. Thank you so much for joining us, Amanda. We're so happy to have you. And I will pass the mic over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
You're doing great. And for people that are listening, if you have a question in the chat, please feel free to put it in there. I'll monitor it and make sure Amanda gets it.
Thank you. I was going to say, I definitely won't be able to look at that while I'm presenting. Appreciate the warm introduction and the invitation to come and chat with this community. I'm really looking forward to it. I was thinking actually, as I was snacking on a little dinner before I logged in, I'm like, this can sort of be the the dessert, the eye candy. I'm here to share some eye candy with you, which is what I consider butterflies to be, as are bees, actually. So, it's Valentine's week. It's good for a little candy. So, as Emily said, I'm Amanda Egertson. I'm the Stewardship Director at the Deschutes Land Trust. And the Deschutes Land Trust is let's see if I can get my slides going. There we go. A nonprofit based in Bend, Oregon, and we work to conserve and care for the lands and waters that help sustain Central Oregon. We've been around for 30 years. And yeah, I've been with the Land Trust now for going on 21, which is kind of crazy. But I love it. And to date, we've conserved close to 20,000 acres in our region. But I'm really excited tonight to share my love of butterflies with you. And so we'll be talking a bit about monarchs, as well as just trying to give you sort of a high level overview of all the different butterfly families and some of the species that we have in this amazing state of ours. I have been enamored with butterflies my entire life. There's a chance actually my mom is logged in all the way from Pennsylvania on this meeting, which is crazy. She just called me a few minutes before we got started. I'm like, Mom, it's past your bedtime. But yeah, I got to chase butterflies with her when I was little, and I've passed that on to my kids who are pictured here. They would probably be appalled to know that I'm sharing these photos with all of you. They've grown up quite a bit since these were taken, but they humored me and came out into the woods with me a lot when they were younger and still do on occasion to chase butters, which I love. So I often like to start a butterfly presentation by getting folks to try to guess how many different butterfly species we have in the state of Oregon. But since that was included in the little blurb about this talk, if you read that, you already know the answer, maybe. So we'll just skip the quiz, and I'll tell you that there are over 160 species of butterflies in the state, which I know when you compare to bees, it's maybe not that many because there are many, many hundreds of native bees. But I think for butterflies, that's a pretty solid number, over 160. And if you think about the incredible diversity in our state, everything from deserts to granitic mountain ranges to the coast and everything in between, and all the different plant groups and communities that are associated with those different places, it's not hard to believe that there is an incredible diversity of these butterflies. So before we jump into the different families and the different species of butterflies, I wanted to take a little time to talk about how a butterfly becomes a butterfly. And I think for those of you that are up on all of your bee knowledge, which I'm sure you know a lot more about bees than I do, you'll see a lot of similarities. So I'm going to use a monarch as my example. So you'll see pictures of monarch caterpillars and adult monarchs. But this is really the same uh, life history cycle for all butterflies, regardless of species. So the first thing that happens is the adult female butterfly needs to find her host plant to lay her eggs on. In the case of the monarch, that's milkweed. And so this is actually a picture of my thumb on a little milkweed leaf on the left side of your screen. And that tiny little white dot is the size of a monarch egg. Lots of different species have different strategies for laying their eggs. Some do it in clumps, clusters, some singly. The eggs look different for different species, but no matter what, the female needs to find a host plant. And for the monarch, that's milkweed. For other species, that's other types of plants. There's some butterflies that will lay their eggs on a suite of different species, maybe not just one, but for the monarch, it is just milkweed. Okay, so the middle picture there is a zoom in of a monarch egg, and that little black dot you see at the top is actually the head of the caterpillar. And once the egg is laid, it'll stay in that form for about 5 days. And after 5 days, the tiny little caterpillar, which we call the mini cat, will chew its way out of the egg. And there on the left side of your screen, you can see the teeny tiny little mini cat beside its egg. And if you look at your pinky nail, um, and look at the length of your pinky nail. The mini cat is about the length of your pinky nail. And over the course of the next 2 weeks, it will grow to the size of your index finger. That is over 2,000 times the size that it started as. And it is absolutely incredible that the caterpillar can grow that big, that fast. And so it eats its host plant leaves. And as it's eating, its body starts to get bigger and bigger, and the skin gets tighter and tighter. And so it needs to break out of that skin. The skin actually splits open, and then there is fresh skin that's more flexible. And it'll sometimes eat the skin that it has just discarded because there's great nutrients in that. And then it'll eat, grow, grow, grow. And it'll keep going through that cycle. And each one of those cycles is called an instar stage. And the monarch caterpillar goes through 5 of those to go from the teeny tiny mini cat to the really big giant caterpillars the size of your index finger. Once it is completed growing, again, that's typically about 2 weeks, it'll hang upside down. It looks like a little J hook, we call this, and it'll spin a little silk platform basically and hang upside down. In this case, the caterpillars are hanging upside down on their host plant leaf. In other cases, the caterpillar will sometimes crawl away and from its host plant and hang upside down on something else, but it hangs upside down. And then within the next 12 to 24 hours, for the final time, its skin will break open and it will reveal a fully formed chrysalis, actually already formed under the skin, which for me, when I was learning about butterflies, kind of blew my mind that the chrysalis is already formed underneath the caterpillar skin. And it sort of does this herky jerky dance around to get that final little piece of skin to fall off. And then within the next 24 hours, that chrysalis smooths out and hardens. And in the case of the monarch butterfly, this is one of the most exquisite, beautiful looking chrysalids ever. It's just this incredible jade green that blends in really well with the milkweed leaf, which you can see surrounding it. It's just astounding. And keep an eye on that black and gold line there, because that is going to come into play when the adult monarch has transformed from a caterpillar into an adult and it's ready to eclose, it's ready to come out of its chrysalis. The chrysalis goes from being jade green to being completely clear. So if you stumble upon a chrysalis and you see this, you'll know that the adult butterfly is just about to come out. And it's amazing. And so the adult butterfly comes out, and do you see how it's got its little legs there sort of gripping on to that band that was that gold and black band that you saw in the chrysalis a few slides back. And its abdomen at this point is very thick and full of bodily fluids, and its wings are damp and sort of shriveled up. And so for the next little bit, it'll be flexing its abdomen and pumping fluids into its wings until they reach their full size. And then it will just hang out there and allow the wings to dry and harden. That usually takes a few hours. The other thing that's amazing that happens when the butterfly comes out of the chrysalis is its proboscis, which you'll see in some pictures here in just a second. With its little sipping straw, the proboscis is actually waving around in 2 pieces, and it zips it together and then curls it up underneath its face, which is amazing. Anyway, after a few hours of drying off, the butterfly is ready to take flight and go find some nectar and potentially mate and lay eggs and begin the cycle again. So that is the life cycle of the butterfly. And I thought it'd be really fun just to take a couple of minutes and share some butterfly fun facts, which several of which I know are also common to the bee world. So one butterfly fun fact is that it can smell with its antenna. It can taste with its feet, and it drinks with its own built-in portable straw, the proboscis. Here's a picture of a woodland skipper getting a sip. Butterflies are solar powered, which is why you typically don't see them flying around on a really cold day. And you will see them basking like this, stretching their wings out to catch the sun rays because they need to warm up their flight muscles in order to be able to fly. And the other thing you might notice butterflies doing is collecting in damp soil. This is really common with California tortoiseshells, which we'll talk about in a little bit, on trails or on mountain passes. You'll see them, excuse me, gathered. But if you're from Central Oregon or you go visit Elk Lake, that's a really common place to see a lot of butterflies gathered on the damp shoreline there. And what they're doing is soaking up salts and minerals through their proboscis. So they don't get everything, all the nutrients they need from the nectar and flowers. And so they'll often gather on damp soils to get those extra salts and minerals. And the one thing I wanted to point out before we jump in now to the families is just a quick difference between moths and butterflies. A lot of folks think that moths are mostly brown or they mostly fly at night. And really, there are some staggeringly beautiful butterflies that fly around in the middle of the day. And this is an example of one. This is an elegant day moth or the sheepherder moth. It has a few different common names. I think it looks like some sort of Dr. Seuss creation. It makes me think of Rainbow Sherbert. I love these guys, but the picture on the right is a moth. So if you look at the antenna, that is going to be your best indicator of whether a little winged creature you see during the day is a moth or butterfly. You can see on the left, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but here at the tip of the antenna is a little ball or a little swollen part of the antenna. So you have a straight filament that goes into a ball. That is indicative of a butterfly. If all you have is a straight filament with nothing at the end, or if you have a straight filament that's covered in all these tiny little hairs, almost looks like a fern, then you know that's a moth. Best way to tell the difference. So you'll be able to see some more of that in the pictures coming up. So just check out the antenna. All right. So let's jump into it. We're going to cover the 5 families of butterflies that we have in Oregon with some samplings from each family. And then we'll talk about how to build habitat to benefit butterflies and other pollinators. All right. First family of butterflies that I want to talk about are the skippers. These guys often get confused for moths, but again, do you see how there's a little swollen bit on the end of the antenna there? That's your clue that it is in fact a butterfly, not a moth. So the butterfly on the left is a silver spotted skipper. It's a big skipper. It's actually the biggest skipper that we have in Oregon. And the coloration of this is very distinctive. They're really easy to tell from other skippers. The one in the middle, the checkered skipper, can be a pretty common garden visitor. Easy to spot, super fun, really dark colored with lots of little white spots all over it. And then you've got the woodland skipper. There are some other skippers that look pretty similar to this one. So this one can be a little bit tricky, but this is another common garden visitor. All right, next family, the swallowtails and the Parnassians. The swallowtails, it's interesting to me, often get confused for monarchs. So in the previous pictures, you saw the monarch is just this brilliant orange color, right? With black veining and white polka dots. The big difference between the monarchs and the swallowtails, they're pretty comparable in size, but the big difference is the background color. So monarchs are going to be orange and swallowtails are not. They're typically yellow or a pale color or even black. But this is our most common swallowtail. This is the Western tiger swallowtail. And here's a picture that shows the difference between a Western tiger swallowtail and a pale tiger swallowtail. If you look, the Western tiger swallowtail, you can see the real butter yellow background versus the pale, which is pale, just like its name. The pale swallowtails are really common around the Metolius River area. If you ever visit that area, I always see them there. I had to include this swallowtail because it's the Oregon state insect. This is the Oregon swallowtail. Not as common, a little harder to spot. Sorry, this is not the best picture. I was hiking at the Land Trust Waichus Canyon Preserve and I saw this. I was like, oh my gosh, I got to grab a picture. But it was with my iPhone and he was moving all over the place. So apologies. It's a little blurry, but state insect, so had to include it. And then the Parnassus butterfly is one of my favorite because it's totally crazy looking. Look at that yellow fuzzy body. It actually looks kind of like a bee, doesn't it? It's amazing. The best place to see the Parnassus butterflies are on Iron Mountain, I think. So that's a fun place to go. The crazy thing about them is that their wings are waxy. They feel like wax paper. So most butterflies have, of course, scales that are overlapping like shingles to create all these amazing color patterns. But the Parnassus, it's like wax paper. It's super wild. Anyway, fun butterfly. Okay, the third family, whites, marbles, and sulfurs. Isn't this a great dessert course, you guys? I love it. Whites, marbles, and sulfurs. So if you see a medium-sized butterfly, so these are smaller than the monarchs and the swallowtails. They're medium, like like that big. And if it's white or yellow or some combination thereof, it belongs in this family. So these are orange tips. This is a Julia's orange tip. We also have Sarah's orange tips. But this is a Julia's. Just go with orange tip at this point. That's good enough. But these are like the robins of the spring. You always see these pretty early on in the spring, and they have these bright, wonderful orange tips to their forewings, which is super fun. The cabbage white often gets confused for a moth because it's kind of drab, but check out the antenna. Do you see the little ball at the end? That's how you know it is a butterfly. I love these guys. If you're a vegetable gardener and you grow cabbage, you might not like them because their caterpillars like to eat it. Okay, the pine white. If you are out walking in the woods in a pine forest and it's like mid to late summer and you look up in the canopy and you see white butterflies flitting about, they are likely pine whites. Very rare to see them on the ground. So when I saw this one on the ground at the Metolius Preserve, I was like, whoa, it's kind of crazy because normally they're way up in the canopy. They lay their eggs on pine needles, and the caterpillars eat pine needles, hence the name pine white. Another favorite in this group are the sulfurs. So there are lots of different kinds of sulfur butterflies. They're a little trickier to identify. This one is a Western sulfur, but they're all such rad. They're like yellow with pink outlining of the wings, pink antenna, green eyes, pink legs. What is there not to love? Okay, I know you thought I could not get any more excited, but I can. I'm going to show you. This is my favorite family of butterflies. I probably shouldn't have a favorite, but I do. These are the gossamer wings, and I love these. I don't know. There's something just about the tiny little blue butterflies that makes me happy. Really crazy thing. There are a lot of different little blue butterflies in this family that look pretty much identical on the top. So we're looking down on the top of the butterfly, otherwise known as the dorsal or the back side. You see that incredible vivid blue color. The next three slides I show you are going to be different kinds of blue butterflies that all look pretty much identical on the back. And you have to see the underwing, the ventral side or the belly side, in order to identify them. Okay, so keep this image in your mind. This is what they look like on the back. The first one I'm going to show you is the Echo Azure, also called the Spring Azure. This is another one of those really early emergers in the spring, like the orange tip that I showed you. But check out the intricate design on the underwing. And do you see how, like, towards the edge of the hind wing, it has these like little triangle tops? Okay, so keep that in your mind. Lots going on in this pattern. The next little blue is an anise blue, and it's like kind of clean, not as much happening. So it's pretty distinctive, right? Kind of crazy chaos, and then a little more order. um, the third blue I'm going to show you, and there are plenty others, but I didn't want to show every single one. The third one is my absolute favorite. To me, this is the peacock of the butterfly world. Like, there is no way to pack any more color into a tiny little underwing than the Melissa blue. So it's got some of the black chaos going on, but then look at all of that incredible orange, goes all the whole hind wing, the whole forewing, and then to top it off, it has tiny little blue sparkles on the hind wing that actually sparkle. When the sun hits it, it sparkles. It's amazing. It's absolutely stunning. And a couple others in this family are the cedar or the juniper hair streak and the purplish copper. Lots more, of course, but just giving you a bit of an overview. All the butterflies in this family are pretty teeny tiny. So we went from the big swallowtails to the medium size whites marbles, remember that group, and then to the teeny tiny gossamers. And now this last group is a little bit bigger. These are the brushfoot butterflies, and they're called brushfoot because, all insects have 6 legs. In the picture on the left, it looks like this butterfly only has 4 legs, but that's because the very front legs on it are reduced in size and covered in tiny little hairs, so they look like little brushes. So the one on the left is a comma. It's got a little comma on the underside of its wing. And then we have a red admiral, very common garden visitor, also really friendly. Like, sometimes they'll come over and land on your shoulder if you're lucky. Lots of different kinds of fritillaries. This one is a great spangled fritillary. The fritillaries are sort of like the blues in that a lot of them look very similar on the top. In that inset picture, a lot of them look like that. And so you have to take a look at the ventral, the underwing, to identify it. This is a Google-eyed wood nymph. I had to include this because, Google eyes, come on. I think this butterfly actually has a really cool strategy. It puts those eyes out there on the outer part of its wing to fake out birds. So birds are a major predator of butterflies. And by having eyes way out there, a bird could be cruising by and be like, ooh, I'm going to take a bite of that, and nab the wing where the eyes are, thinking it's the head. When in fact, it's just the wing. And I've actually seen butterflies that are missing a tiny little triangle in their wing where a bird beak did a strike, which is pretty wild. And the butterfly, obviously it would rather have its entire wing intact, but it can fly around still if it's missing a little piece of its wing. But it can't fly around if it's missing a piece of its body, its abdomen or thorax or its head. The California tortoiseshells, I mentioned these earlier in the talk. These are the butterflies that gather in the thousands. We just had a huge population boom of them this past summer in the Cascades. There were just so many of them. And I'll often get calls like, Amanda, there's thousands of monarch butterflies. And I wish there were thousands of monarch butterflies in the state of Oregon all at once. But sadly, that's not the case. Those are California tortoiseshells. And I get why people confuse them, right? Similar color, but the California tortoiseshells are smaller and just not that punch of orange, which I'm going to show you again here in just a minute. These guys overwinter as adults, as do mourning cloaks, these. And so every once in a while on a warm winter day, if it warms up enough, you might see an adult California tortoiseshell or mourning cloak flitting about, and then it'll go back into its little hibernation state when it gets cold again. I had to mention the Great Arctic as well tonight because this butterfly is super special. It only flies on even years in in Central Oregon. So it takes 2 full years to go through its whole life cycle that we talked about, from egg to caterpillar to chrysalis to adult. It actually spends 2 winters in different instar stages of its caterpillar state, and then it finally becomes an adult. And so only on even years. So every even year when I'm leading butterfly tours, I get really excited because we know we're going to see Arctics, typically in the forested areas. I always see them at the Metolius Preserve. So exciting thing to look out for this summer. And then, of course, the monarch. The monarch belongs to the brushfoot family. And you probably noticed that the majority of these butterflies that I just showed you in this brushfoot family have some combination of oranges, browns, maybe some white, maybe some grays in them. It's just one of their common traits. Okay, so overwintering. How does a butterfly survive the winter? In Oregon, it can survive it in any one of these life stages. Each species of butterfly has its own strategy for surviving the winter. As I mentioned, California tortoiseshells, mourning cloaks, they overwinter as an adult. Swallowtails will overwinter as a chrysalis. Other butterflies in the egg stage or the caterpillar stage. But the monarchs don't do any of those things. The monarchs get out of town because they're a tropical butterfly and they can't survive the winter in any one of those states. So they leave. So we're going to just spend a few minutes talking about the amazing monarch migration and how monarchs handle the winter. So here's just a basic map of the United States. For the most part, this is not a hard and fast rule, but for the most part, monarchs that are west of the Rocky Mountains migrate to the coast of California to spend the winter, and monarchs that are east of the Rocky Mountains go to the Central Highlands of Mexico. So that means if you're a monarch and you're up in Quebec, you might travel 3,000 miles to get to the Central Highlands of Mexico, maybe 40 or so miles a day, anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 feet in the air, and you're cruising. For our Western monarchs here on the west side of the Rockies, could be several hundred miles to 1,000 miles if you're up in British Columbia and you go all the way to the coast of California. But what happens at the end of the summer, early fall, days are getting shorter, nights are getting longer. Milkweed is starting to senesce. Other nectar plants are starting to senesce. And you're tapping into all those cues. And so this generation of monarchs that migrates south to the overwintering grounds, regardless of what side of the Rockies you're on, is called the super generation of monarchs. And so you go find a place to overwinter. Here is a picture that I took of some monarchs in an overwintering ground in California, where they're, hanging from eucalyptus trees, other trees, and they gather in these massive clusters. They're going to these places, whether it's the Central Highlands of Mexico or California, because it's cool and damp, and they can slow down their metabolism and nestle in there together, get protection from storms to the best of their abilities, and wait out the winter. And then as spring comes and the days are getting longer and the sun is getting warmer and hopefully some milkweed is starting to pop out of the ground, they start to get the feeling like, okay, it's time to find a mate and lay eggs. So these monarchs, the super generation that flew all the way to the overwintering ground, survived the entire winter, are now like, all right, it's time to go. So they travel a little inland and a little north in California, find a mate, lay eggs on milkweed, and die. And then the life cycle. So out of the eggs in about 5 days comes a caterpillar. Then for the next 2 weeks is munching, and then it does its chrysalis for 10 to 12 days typically, and then out comes a new generation of monarch. That generation flies a little farther north, finds a mate, lays eggs, and dies. That generation only lives 2 to 5 weeks. And then another generation is born. That generation, 2 to 5 weeks, travels a little farther north, and they basically leapfrog their way as far north as they can get, typically until about the summer equinox. So, somewhere in late June or so, they stop going north and then they hang out. Sorry, I'm getting warm. I'm going to be like a monarch caterpillar and shed my outer skin here for a second. Um, anyway, so I just think it's astounding that they do this leapfrog game to get as far north as they can. And then when it becomes fall again, that is the super generation that ecloses from their chrysalis, and they're the ones that migrate. So they are so far removed. It's not like birds who learn migration routes, right, from their adult, cohorts. It's just they know where to go. Obviously, there is science behind it, but I call it magic. I think it's pretty amazing. And I know, I'm sure all of you are familiar with, excuse me, the declines in the monarch population. Back in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, we had, millions of overwintering monarchs on the California coast. Just incredible numbers. And now we are down to this past year. I think the overwintering counts was around 12,000. It's been doing sort of this roller coaster thing. We went all the way down to 2,000 several years ago, and then we bounced back up to hundreds of thousands, and now we're back. Last year it was like 9 to 10,000. This year it's about 12,000, but the numbers are staggeringly low. And it's really a result of many things. Development pressure on overwintering grounds, climate change, really severe winter storms, but also very dry summers, plants senescing. We were having a conversation before the program started about, what happens to all the insects that rely on plants blooming at certain times, and how they get, kind of misaligned when we have these weird climactic events. And so that is a huge issue. And the other really big one is pesticides, specifically neonicotinoids, which are systemic pesticide. They get into the plant tissue. So, and they're expressed then in the pollen and in the nectar. And so there's a lot of work being done to try to battle against the neonicotinoids. But let's cheer ourselves up and talk about what we can do to help monarchs and all the other pollinators that are out there, because I know this is something that I think most of you are interested in, as far as learning more about how to build habitat for bees and other pollinators. So obviously, in the case of monarchs, plant milkweed. And actually, if you're tuning in from Central Oregon, you can reach out to the Deschutes Land Trust and we will send you showy milkweed seeds for free. But we're really focused on local genetics. And so if you are from outside of Central Oregon, we're happy to help connect you with other resources so that you can get milkweed seeds that are right for wherever you are from. So here's a picture of showy milkweed, and here's one of narrowleaf. These are our two most common milkweeds in Oregon, and I have them both in my yard, and lots of bees love milkweed. Hummingbirds love milkweed. Swallowtails love milkweed. All sorts of insects. So it's a wonderful thing to have. And I will just toss this in. If you are not, it does spread rhizomatously when it's happy. And if you don't dig that, I get it. That's okay. It's really easy to just have it in container pots. I have mine in a raised bed, and it does great there. Other really important thing to do is make sure that you have various nectar plants blooming from spring through fall. So Emily was talking actually before I started about having like being able to turn in your plant inventory from your area and get information back about what other plants might be good to plant. And that's such an incredible uh, offering and tool. This is something that we talk a lot about at the Deschutes Land Trust, is looking for a plant palette in our restoration areas so that there's always stuff in bloom. Really important. And for butterflies, and I'll look to you to tell me if this is the case for bees, but for butterflies, they're very specific with their host plants when it comes to laying eggs and what the caterpillars can eat. And then as adults, they become a little more generalist. So they might still exhibit preferences, but typically adult butterflies will nectar from a much larger suite of flowers than they will lay their eggs on. A couple other things I wanted to point out. This is Indian Fork Meadow Preserve. This is a land trust property. Let me flip my note. I haven't been paying attention to my notes at all. Um, I wanted to share this slide just to emphasize how important it is in restoration plantings to plant in clumps, especially for butterflies, because can you imagine as a caterpillar like crawling off your host plant, you've munched a bunch of leaves and now you got to crawl over and find another one. If you have to crawl super far, that's not a great thing. Same for hummingbirds that are looking for nectar. They're just going to expend important resources if they're flying really far to get to the next plant. So planting in clumps is really important. Willow is a great early season plant. It blooms early and it is the host plant for swallowtails, mourning cloaks, and lorquin's admirals. And then I thought I'd mention lupin and violets. These are sort of a little bit later in the season, like early to mid-season bloomers, and they are host plants for a whole bunch of different blues. Those are the ones that I was gushing over earlier, and also the greater fritillaries. And then really, really important, really maybe the most important, I don't know, these late season nectar resources. It's funny, in a lot of the restoration work we do at the Land Trust, I hear from some of our neighbors that they don't love rabbit brush. And I love rabbit brush because it's always in vibrant bloom late, late, late in the summer, early into fall, and so vital for so many of the butterflies and the bees and the other pollinators that are out there, especially for monarchs that are trying to migrate during that time. So rabbit brush is great. Goldenrod is great. Buckwheats. And then these plants are also host plants for hair streaks, blues, coppers, and checker spots. So I've mentioned a couple of our restoration projects. We do at the Land Trust a lot of floodplain restoration project where we're, valley-wide restoration. And of course, streams are often migration corridors for all sorts of wildlife, including butterflies and monarchs. I've seen monarchs migrating along Waichus Creek, which is pictured here in the foreground. This is Camp Polk Meadow Preserve, where we did floodplain restoration from 2009 to 2012, planted about 200,000 native plants in the ground and made sure that a lot of them were pollinator friendly, all obviously native plants. Seen monarchs migrating along the Deschutes River as well. And we're very lucky to partner with the Oregon Bee Atlas. We often have volunteers request permission to come out to some of our properties where we've done restoration work. This is Camp Polk Meadow Preserve, again, just a different part of the property where they're inventorying bees. And that's been really helpful to us because we're looking forward to learning more about what additional plants we should be planting. So in our area, right, what types of native bees should we expect to have here? And if we're not seeing those, what plants should we put in the ground so that we can be improving our own plant palettes, because we're still learning as well. As I mentioned, we work really hard to make sure that we don't have pesticides on any of our native pollinator friendly plants, and definitely encourage others to do so. And then I just wanted to share these resources, and if it's helpful, if folks are interested, I can make this slide available later, but this is just a list of a lot of resources that are out there. the Deschutes Land Trust Pollinator Hub that I mentioned. This is where you can go to get free milkweed seed, the Oregon Bee Atlas, lots of great information there. The Xerces Society, which is fully dedicated to invertebrate conservation, really incredible organization that's a big partner of ours. They have a great pollinator resource center. The Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper is a great place to go if you're interested in trying to get some milkweed plants or seeds in your local area. And then Oregon Flora and Calscape are both really great websites, I think, for learning more about native plants, plants that are native to your area, and even insects and animals that are tied to those plants. And then Butterflies of Oregon, I really enjoy. Neil Bjorklund is the one that put this website together. He lives in Eugene and has sort of made it his life's mission to photograph all of the butterflies of our amazing state. He has incredible photography and also a lot of really great information about preferred habitat, and where to go and when to see different butterflies. So with that, there's a Lorquin's Admiral, really gorgeous butterfly from the brushfoot family. I will stop sharing my screen, maybe, and I'm happy to try to answer questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amanda. I personally learned so much. I can't believe uh how many butterflies there are in Oregon. I had no idea we had so many, so it's wonderful to learn about them. And we did have a note in the chat that we have a butterfly fan who photographed a monarch this week in Yuma, Arizona. So that's very exciting.
I'm so
We have a question on what is the status of monarchs in Western Oregon? And I know that's kind of a big question, but however you want to approach that.
um well, that is actually an interesting way to phrase the question, and feel free to interrupt me if I'm not getting at this the right way for the person that just asked that question. We think of the status of the Western monarch sort of as a whole. So we think about it more holistically, not like what is the status of monarchs in Western Oregon versus Eastern versus Washington. Does that make sense? It's like we're really focused on how are the Western monarchs doing overall, and the best way we have right now to determine that is to do these overwintering counts, which the Xerces Society has been heavily involved in for many, many years. But there's a lot of really cool emerging science. So I'll give a little snippet. This is a total rabbit hole that we don't have to go down tonight necessarily, but there are a lot of scientists that are looking at actually a couple of things. The overwintering sites, some interesting things are happening. So it was traditionally that the monarchs would go to the overwintering sites and remain in reproductive diapause, so not be mating with each other. They're just hanging out all winter long. And then when they get the spring cues, they move away from the wintering grounds and start to mate and lay eggs. They're seeing more reproductive activity in the overwintering grounds now, and they're also starting to find monarchs in other places. So one of the questions is like, are the overwintering numbers low because we really don't have many monarchs left? Or, I mean, for sure we don't have as many as we used to, but are they also maybe low because they're in other locations? They're becoming reproductively active, or like they're not even going into reproductive diapause. They're just coming down to California, and then they're like maybe hang out in San Francisco in a garden. And so we're trying to figure out like what are these monarchs actually doing? And they've finally nailed down the technology in order to put these tiny little, we've been putting like sticker tags on monarchs for a long time and doing like mark recapture studies, but now they're putting these tiny little radio transmitters on and erecting these MODIS stations throughout actually the country. And we're trying to collect more data now on what are the flight patterns and where are they going. And the hope is that we can better understand the actual movement of individuals and what they're doing. And then I think we'll be able to dig more deeply into yeah, how are monarchs faring in these different areas? So right now, that's a tough question to answer. How are the monarchs in Western Oregon doing? I don't really know, right? All I know are the numbers of the overwintering grounds and, the hope that there's going to be a lot more tagging um, going on, yeah, in the future that'll hopefully shed more light.
That's I think a really really great answer to that question, Amanda. Very nuanced. And just to kind of follow up on that question, when you're saying that we don't really think of the monarchs as being in Western Oregon, Eastern Oregon, etc., is that because they're all part of the same breeding population and so they're
Yeah.
all connected? Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
but
yeah.
that's different than the monarchs that are on the east side of the United States, which are not connected via
It's
breeding.
genetic. Yeah, so genetically they're identical. Eastern monarchs and Western monarchs are the same organism. But typically the Rocky Mountains is sort of this pseudo dividing line. Now, that is not to say monarchs can pass over. But they just don't like most of the monarchs on the east side of the Rockies, stay over there. They go to Mexico, to overwinter. Um, but yes, we think of Western monarchs are in any state to the west of the Rockies. And so to differentiate between like the western part of Oregon versus the eastern part, I mean, there are monarchs. You can see a monarch pretty much anywhere in Oregon. It just kind of depends. And right now, right, there just aren't that many. So, I mean, I consider myself very fortunate when I see like one or two monarchs in a summer.
Yeah.
Hopefully, someday I'll see a whole bunch. Uh,
Personally, I've only ever seen monarchs in California. I haven't seen them in Oregon.
well,
Um,
you're in Portland now, right? There, you might see some in Portland. There's a Portland Monarch
okay,
Advocate group. You should yeah, tap into that. You
that's exciting. Great tip. Thank you. Okay, and I know we're almost out of time, but we have a couple more questions if you don't mind letting us pick your brain a little extra. Um, how long does it take for monarchs to find a new site where they haven't been before? Is one question we have. Or maybe a way to like rephrase that is like, um, how can a monarch find it? Or like if you're planting milkweed, how do you know that's going to help a monarch that's never
see.
been to your
That is
property before?
such a great question. Okay, well, I don't know if that was the person's initial question, but that's the way you just framed that, Emily, is such a good one. We get a lot of those questions just in Bend because we're always the Deschutes Land Trust. That's where we are, encouraging people to plant milkweed, and you're like, okay, so I plant it. Then what? I have read that they can actually sense milkweed from miles away. So, and it's so fun when people tell us, now that we've been doing monarch conservation for several years here, fortunately people do come to us with their sightings, which we're like, yay! And so then we spread the word and we're like, well, Dorothy on this block over here just had a monarch visiting her milkweed, and here's her picture of it. So there's one in town, and then I'm always like standing out in my driveway by my milkweed patch saying, come on, monarch, come over to my yard. Um, I don't know how long, but I do know that they can sense it from, quite a distance. It's pretty impressive but if the real question is how do they know how to get from like British Columbia to California when you're like a fifth generation, separated, or third generation, whatever, from the last batch of super generation monarchs, there are still parts of it that bewilder the scientists, right? I mean, they do have navigational tools. They can cue into they have a sun compass. They can cue into the Earth's magnetic compass, some of the similar things to what birds do, but how they know how to gauge that and like get to the overwintering grounds that they have never been to. I mean, they're potentially following stream courses to some extent. I said that I will see them migrating along streams or mountain ranges, sadly, sometimes highways. If they're way up in the sky, that's maybe a little bit safer. They can apparently, massive wildfires do not deter them. There have been recent studies, like you would think. I mean, we've had such explosive wildfires in the West the past several years, and it's just like, oh, what's going to happen to the monarchs? And they somehow seem to get through. It's wild. And I mean, I'm not a monarch scientist, so I should just preface this whole thing by saying that I just know what I've read and talked to, other people that are lepidopterists. So I don't have all the answers, but it is pretty astounding for sure.
Well, that's amazing. And we certainly appreciate like you sharing your decades of experience with us. Just because you're not a lepidopterist, you still have a lot of knowledge and value to add to the conversation. Okay, last question, hopefully. So this kind of feeds into the question from before. Are there areas of the state where monarchs used to be present, but they no longer occur? So I think that's also kind of getting at some of that migration question
Yeah,
potentially.
that's a good question that I don't know the answer to. I will see if I can find something on the Xerces website about that because they have a ton of monarch information, but I am not familiar specifically with like, oh, we have always had monarchs here and now we have none. I would say that that would certainly likely occur in an area that has been really developed and no longer has any
Right.
milkweed at all, then those are the places that the monarchs are going to disappear from for sure. But I don't know that those places have been like formally mapped. That's a good question.
Got it. Awesome. Well, thank you for staying a little extra time with us. We really appreciate it. I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you for having me. Thanks, everybody.